Hello. Um, Now where did I? Oh my goodness! I think I've made an enormous error. I've put my notes down somewhere. However, um, today we are going to be looking at a fairly long list of stories. Some of them related to the Western Cape, some not. Now, it's there's a number of items that we're going to be going over, which are somewhat more in depth, but I'll do those in a minute. First, we're going to do an update on what's been happening in the Western Cape. But at the top, I want to mention what our top stories are. Now, obviously, the biggest one will be the list of 44 Afrikaners who have signed a letter basically condemning the efforts of AfriForum and Solidarity to reach out to the United States for diplomatic support and the refugee program in particular. Now, the big news is that this turns out to have been a government PR exercise directed by former state intelligence agent, or, well, is there anything such thing as a former state intelligence agent? Karen Berger. Um, More on that later. There's also going to be details on the Electoral Reform Act that the DA are pushing. There's going to be a brief mention of a land invasion undergoing in Blaauwberg. And we're going to have a bit of a deep dive into central bank digital currencies and digital ID, because this is a big thing that the DA are currently pushing, and the ANC, as a matter of fact, although the ANC are somewhat less, they feel less urgency about this, apparently. There's another item over here which I think needs to be paid attention to, which is how South Africa is losing its medical specialists, partially due to BEE, partially due to just how terribly everything's run and the bad culture of within the medical establishment in South Africa. So those we will be going into a bit more detail. However, briefly, we want to point out that we've had the ANC is reconfiguring the Western Cape leadership ahead of the new election. So they have put Ibrahim Rasool in charge of the province for the party, mainly because his getting kicked out as a diplomat for the in the United States for lack of documents, as well as attacking the president and saying he's a white supremacist and all that kind of stuff. You know, things that you just generally shouldn't do. He's also got a history of corruption. So he was involved in the brown envelope scandal, which most of you won't remember, but that was about 10, 15 years ago. This was when the ANC bribed a whole selection of journalists in papers now owned by IOL, um, in order to give good coverage to the DA's governance at the time. That didn't work out too well for them. They didn't last the year until the local elections. DA is now in charge. We all know this. So um, we also have the DA kicking up a water resilience strategy. Now, unfortunately, we don't really know what the specific implementation uh, schedule is going to be, what they're going to do exactly. There's lots of sort of press photos with the provincial guys standing there with big sheepish grins on their face, clutching their genitals. You know, that weird stance that people do where they put their hands like this, but like over their crotch. You know, that weird thing. Anyway, so there's lots of those little promotional photos, and then they've said they've got, you know, the usual sort of rah quotes. But I mean, some of the stuff is a little bit you know, fanciful. So the water resilience strategy is a critical enabler of our jobs for growth for jobs vision, which aims to build a R1 trillion economy by 2035. Okay, sure. And they've got like a 10-year plan, but they've only published the goals. They haven't published the actual implementation stuff, as far as I'm aware. I might be wrong, but when we get to it, I'll do an article and break that down. So what they're doing is they're trying to secure an additional 310 million cubic meters of water a year. Now, difficult to know exactly what that means without doing a little bit of research first, because I don't know the top of my head what the actual scale of the current supply is, but with the population growing a lot and rainfall being relatively unpredictable in the Cape from year to year, you don't know what you're going to get, and we're in a lot of trouble. And we've already lost a desalination plant 5 years ago in Cape Town because they're dumping sewage into the bay, and that created so many contaminants that the desalination plant couldn't handle it, and they sued for breach of contract. Um, so they want to conserve 40 million cubic meters annually through efficiency and demand management. So demand management's a difficult one to understand. They're going to try and get people to use less water. And they've started a few of those initiatives around the province in a few municipalities, trying to sort of address the big water users and so on. They also want to, as they say, diversify the water resources. I, I don't know what this is going to necessarily be, but they want to get non-revenue water losses to below 25%. I don't think this is realistic. They've been trying to get, leakages and long running taps and sabotage and stuff under control in the informal settlements for years, and it's had very little impact. They still lose a lot of water in these areas. And then they want to achieve blue drop and green drop scores of 95% or higher in at least 80% of municipalities. Now, if I remember correctly, the blue drop is for drinkable water and the green drop is for wastewater. Now, they're going to struggle to do that in Cape Town without cooking the books, because for 130 years we've been dumping water into the bay. Langeberg is also going to be a problem because they don't have as much control over that municipality as they used to. And they lost seats there to the Vryheidsfront Plus years ago and to the PA, because they didn't manage the water there. They actually allowed it to get dangerously bad. So, I mean, look, this is a usual thing. The DA can only do so much with the local human capital in a given municipality, which is why I think it's part of the reason why they parachute so many people in from outside your area who don't know a damn thing about what's going on. But yeah, we'll find out about that in due course. We don't really know now. I mean, one of the other, but just to bounce back quickly, one of the other fellows who is going to be part of the ANC leadership team as the main fundraiser is Richard Janti, who was accused of trying to bribe public protector Mkhwebane, not Mkonazi, Mkhwebane, a few years ago to stop looking into him and various other people. Uh, so when Mkhwebane was public protector. So, we've got a usual list of crooks, but I think what they've done is they've picked Ibrahim Rasool to be leader because his comments about Israel and his comments about Donald Trump's white supremacy, these things, they signal a lot of support, particularly to like the Muslim sector of the colored population. And of course, he's Ibrahim Rasool. That's actually going to go for it. They previously went with their premier's candidate being um, Cameron, not Cameron, Cameron Dugmore. The Cameron Dugmore being one of the few white guys left in the ANC. I think it's obvious why they went for that. They like candidates in the Western Cape these days, but it's I think honestly they're being silly. If they really wanted to win, they'd push a hardline black nationalist candidate and mobilize the black population, because they're making the same mistake as the DA, because the DA win by mobilizing their base, not by converting people outside of their ethnic base. And the ANC are the same, but instead they're trying to reach out, which I don't think that's a really effective strategy. Their problem is actually low turnout. They have the numbers to really make a big impact, and they don't do it. Another big, no, let's see. Let's try and keep in the Western Cape. Yes, we've got the Good Party showing that they have paying attention. You've got 2 Western Cape MECs accused of hiding 3.8 billion rand in the provincial budget, and the people involved are Murray Wenger and David Mania. Now, David Mania, we've criticized him for his handling of the teachers retrenchment before when it was going on. Now, Brett Herron it takes the usual sort of bleeding heart socialist nonsense angle again. Now, we respect Brett Herron a lot for his attention to detail and his attention to local issues. I think there are very few people in the Western Cape political class who actually pay as much attention as him. However, his position is basically whatever the ANC would have said, which is, oh, don't fire the poor teachers, all of that kind of stuff. Look, my position, and I think the sort of position that's supported by research, is that what the best thing that David Mania could have done is use this as an opportunity to get rid of the worst performing teachers. Instead, he tried to fire them by lottery, and then when the unions protested, he got scared, and the party got scared of bad press and looking mean, so they backed down somewhat. But the main justification for flogging the teachers was a budget shortfall. But what they're doing is, according to Brett Herron, they in the 2024 budget, they hid 3.8 billion rand that was missing from other departments in the education department budget. This is the allegation, if I've got it correct. So the idea is that they had to sort of get sack teachers in order to cover up for financial problems elsewhere. So this is that's fairly serious. I'm going to be keeping tabs on that. That's very good stuff. And yeah, and then another one in the provincial government, Alan Windy getting under the microscope by the Cape Times. There's an article by Nicola Daniels bringing up something that's not technically news, but it's worth paying attention to again because it's an ongoing issue. So and this is something that I've tried to get. I've tried to get on the radar of the few DA members that I have contact with still, which is the deal that Zuma struck with the gangs in 2011. Now, this was uncovered by Sam Soul in 2015, and when it made a minor scandal which the DA briefly made noise about, but then forgot. The ANC actually responded by saying, yeah, the deal with the gangs is no big deal. There's nothing illegal in protecting gangs from the consequences of their crime. This is what the colored community are like, and this is how we need to canvass for votes. This was their basic position, is that the only way we can get the colored people on side is by siding with the gangsters, because those are their real community leaders. It's like the most perverse and sort of bigoted position possible. But the effect of this has been, and I've struggled to find my old Excel sheet for crime data, but there's basically, I mean, you've got this trend through the 20th century where you've got a gradual increase in violent crime over the 20th century, but not like globally remarkable until the 1980s. This is due to urbanization, youth of the population, so on. These are universal factors you'll see everywhere. The only places where urbanization did not cause a rise in crime anywhere in recorded history is Switzerland and Japan in the 1970s. So this is just it's broadly seen as a rule. But what changed in South Africa in the 1980s was the People's War. Now, the People's War is a sort of omnidirectional terror campaign against ordinary members of the public and against rival liberation movements like the Black Consciousness Movement, AZAPO, BCP, and the Zulu Nationalists and the IFP, in order to get a monopoly on bargaining power for a transition after it became known in sort of diplomatic circles and intelligence circles that the ANC had decided to unwind apartheid after 1977. So the ANC go and get trained in Vietnam by Vong Nguyen Giap and adopt the People's War strategy the Vietnamese took, and they bring it to South Africa and they start terrorizing the hell out of everybody within their orbit. And this led to a widespread community violence and basically a civil war that took over 20,000 lives. And the consequences of this is in a civil war, you get lots of people using the cover of this violence to settle personal scores and get away with all kinds of crime like gun running, drug smuggling, drug dealing, prostitution, child trafficking, sex trafficking, all of this kind of stuff that happens explodes when you have these conditions. And so violent crimes just starts climbing like this, and you get like to a national homicide rate that's somewhere between 80 and 100 people per 100,000. Um, and it starts coming down after 1993 when they've secured all of the conditions they wanted. So it starts trending down until 2011, and in 2011 it reverses. It sort of plateaus in most of the country, and then it's been climbing a little bit recently, but not by an enormous amount. The Western Cape, however, was the fastest decline. It became peaceful much quicker than everywhere else. And by 2011, we were one of the more peaceful places in the country. Limpopo, of course, always being fairly nice and sleepy. Homicide rates at about 10 per 100K. That's comparable with, like, Eastern Europe and Latin America, some parts of Latin America, the sleepier parts of Latin America. And what happened there is that because of the deal with gangs and because of mass influx of people from the Eastern Cape, who were the most violent, one of the most violent parts of the country, one of the only places where you will see a consistency in homicide rate between urban and rural of an extraordinary high level. So this influx coupled with the deal with the gangs means that now immediately from 2011 the Western Cape's homicide level climbs right back up and is now the most violent part of the country. So this is a very serious issue. And in 2022, Alan Winde got a report about the ties between the gangs and SAPS. And in SAP's crime intelligence, we had serious problems. And Charles Kinnear, the lieutenant colonel. I can't remember what his rank was. This was a colored detective who was widely recognized for his extraordinary bravery and his almost like single-minded zeal to deal with the gang issues. And he started going after connections with crime intelligence, and they assassinated him. It was a collaboration between cops and gang members, and we still haven't seen anything happen to the cops involved. Still in the Mkonazi inquest, even despite Becky Cele making an appearance, nobody's looked into this whatsoever. Very disappointing situation. And Alan Winde has sat on this report since 2022. He will not publish it. It's absolutely mental. I don't know why he hasn't published it yet. It's not there's no reason for him to keep it secret. There's no reason whatsoever. This stuff must be published. And so the Cape Times going after this is very, very good. Let me just check the name of the reporter because they need a little shout out. It's Nicola Daniels. So look for that. This obviously is a very serious problem. There's just nothing on it. This needs to be updated. They need to go off. Apparently, though, the what's it called? The National Colored Congress will apparently raise this in the provincial legislature. They should also raise it in the national legislature. I think it's actually of national concern. But you've got the usual sort of little NGOs making their statements as well, but that's not really important. What's interesting is that the ANC is also criticizing Alan Winde for this, even though it would implicate his party. I think, when you see this kind of maneuver, you know that it's sort of it's a bit of like a pro wrestling kayfabe situation. So we saw this in the United States with the Epstein case. So it was absolute radio silence. If you mentioned it at all, you're an evil conspiracy theorist, right wing Nazi, whatever. Until Donald Trump decided to back down on looking into it, and the second he blinked on releasing those secrets, the Democrat side and all of their talking heads went and said, "Ha, it's Donald Trump. He's the one. Epstein's a big deal." So you see, there's like this thing of once you know that nothing can happen, you can use it as a sort of public rhetorical bargaining chip fairly freely. And so, what's it called? ANC members sort of mentioning this means that ANC members mentioning this means that it's like they're fairly comfortable with the scenario that it's like nothing's going to come out. Um, so, yeah, I mean, leader of the opposition in the provincial legislature, Khaled Syed, said Windy has a pattern of withholding critical reports from both the legislature and the people of this province. Like all this bloviating nonsense. But yes, that needs to be released. What are we looking at here? Cape Heritage sites. There's a few little places that have been named as cultural heritage sites. Some of them are kind of not all that major, but we've got Harold Cressy High School in District 6. We understand that one. Usual, apartheid sort of remembering sort of the things that were done by Pretoria to this part of the world during the height of the Group Areas Act. You've got St. George's Cathedral, also recognized as a significant site in the struggle, mainly because the church was involved in a lot of community organizing in the UDF. So there's also a little bit of something more ancient. So there's the rock shelter Deep Kloof near Elands Bay. So that's been a big one for cave paintings, little tool fragments found there, and so on. So it's like a significant place that it was under continual habitation, or at least regular nomadic habitation for, I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of years. So I think some of these are interesting, but nothing really mind blowing. Just and then we've also got a more environmental one, which is for Lorenvlei as a important estuary. So nice little stuff there. Nothing to really object to, but UCT is also in the news again because of their stance against Israel. So in 2023, they took a stance against what's happening in Gaza. That's not particularly hair raising. A lot of universities have done this, but what they did that really pissed off not investors, that's the wrong word, donors, was that they went against the Holocaust Memorial Society's definition of anti-Semitism. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the precise definition in front of me, but I assume it has some overlap with, Israel and Zionism. That would make sense. But at any rate, it seems to be a bit of a risky move. And at any rate, they lost, I think, 200 million in donors' funds, and they're in serious trouble. And there was another tranche of donors who retracted their support from UCT as well. And you've got what's the name? There's a guy, Professor Adam Mendelsohn. He's made a bit of a grievance there. So there's a legal case against the university over whether or not the university's council acted lawfully and in the institution's best interests for taking this stance. And I think it's pretty clear that you've got a university council that's not very clever. I mean, the problem with UCT is that they're really just way too political. I mean, they've recently started implementing these sort of Orwellian little oversight committees in the student body to force ideological compliance within the student body and societies and the dorms and the classrooms and all of this. So they've put together these little like student commissars that can monitor everyone and make sure that they are sufficiently anti-white and so on and so forth. And then like the Israel-Palestine thing is also going to be relevant. But they've been like this for years now, and it's just grinding everyone down. I think, look, paradoxically, they're kind of from what I gather, there's a bit of a freer atmosphere than in Stellenbosch, despite the fact that UCT is home to a lot more radical views. So Stellenbosch, you won't get the genocide stuff very often. UCT, you see it a bit. University of Pretoria, you see it a bit. University of Pretoria is also an interesting one because it's a place where you still got some conservative Afrikaners, but you've also got that big force of the Zanian critical theory in the legal department and so on. So it's another one of those weird ones where you get these sort of paradoxical environments where Stellenbosch is like very sort of mainstream, safe, woke, but absolutely nothing outside of that is allowed in. So yeah, I think yeah, UCT is in trouble. UCT is in a lot of trouble. They're not managing their finances properly. Yeah, there's lots of issues. They should just stop being political and focus on doing the job that they're supposed to do. Although we'll see how that goes. In national news, before we get on to the ones that we're going to dive into particularly deeply, I want to quickly mention that SARS is pushing for a global minimum tax compliance policy. So there's an international push called the Global Anti-Base Erosion Initiative. So this is about eliminating tax havens, so that every population has kind of got like a captive elite class that they can milk. So yeah, you're never going to get rid of extractive and redistributive government policies. That's the idea. And they're looking to implement it by 2026. So they're going to ratchet up and make more strict the tax brackets that apply in South Africa. And I'm not going to dive into the actual numbers on that just yet. I think that's for another time. Maybe for next week we can have a look at that in more detail. But it's worth taking a look at having every state in the world having a harmonized tax schedule is the idea, and South Africa is very much behind that. You've got a few little interesting ones like. Another one of these weird international groups called the International Finance Corporation has backed a push for smart cities. So, like, there's one being built by Baldwin Properties in Mooikloof in Gauteng. Now, smart city is where you have full biometric control and monitoring of all inhabitants and their consumption of utilities and so on. This is part of something that Ramaphosa has mentioned that he wants to do this with the public cities or on the private cities as well. But it's only the DA that's been pushing for this, like the Department of Public Works and so on. And they've also mentioned that they want to do this in Johannesburg using getting buy-in from all of the private property owners to have biometric controls in all residential buildings. Yeah, this is coming, guys. We're getting closer down to the wire. One of my more interesting, one of the Western Cape ones I just quickly missed because I'm disorganized, is the story of Steenkampskraal. Now, Sean Jacobs of the Daily Investor, I think he writes for other papers as well. I've seen his name around a bit. Now, we've covered Steenkampskraal for a few years, since the beginning of the paper 2 years ago. But it seems that this is sort of catching up on some of them, and you'll see it in the trade papers, like Mining Weekly, Engineering Weekly. But it's finally starting to hit other papers a bit. Steenkampskraal was an abandoned mine from years and years ago. But now it was reopened because it was found that it has an estimated resource of 70,000 tons of rare earth oxides. And our rare earth elements are very important to renewable energy construction, to electronics, to all kinds of things. And China has almost a monopoly on this, right? But the deposit in Steenkampskraal is extraordinary because, okay, so around the world, you'll find a lot of places where the stuff is being mined. You'll have concentrations of like 1 to 2%, sometimes 3, or sometimes up to 5%. And it'll be a sandy deposit. And processing sand is actually really, really difficult for the machines, and it fatigues a lot of the moving parts. But um, they're finding that the low end in this deposit is 15%, and the high end is 40%. So it's the richest and purest deposit of rare earth minerals anywhere on the planet. And it's coming at a crucial time where it'll be becoming a bargaining chip for South Africa's position internationally. And if they shut America off from this could be a problem. So if the national government wants to buy good, figure out a good position, they should probably, let the Americans extract it. Um, that would be in their interest, not in ours, because who cares about us? But what would be in our interest is if the ANC decides to be harakat and refuses to export this to America, because in America will see it as a strategic resource they need to gain control of, and then they'll start trying to do funny things over here that could get interesting for us. Um, but I mean, look, I don't really like American interference very much, but it's what we've got. Apparently, they're going to start full scale extraction by 2027. So that's when it's going to become very politically interesting. But for now, just keep an eye on it. Remember, it's there. Very, very important. You yeah, and then in line with what another story I missed out was in line with the Western Cape's water resilience thing. We've got Langeberg has now started to implement water restrictions. And that's because their dams are critically low. So Dasishoek is down at 24%, and the Onerdam is now at 40%, and Boerdam is now at 38%. So this is the three dams in the area that provide the water, and they were all at between 65 and 80% last year this time. So kind of concerning. Summer's about to hit. Not much more rain is going to land. Most of this is going to dry up. Dassies could probably dry up completely almost. It's certainly possible. So yeah, and I mean Langeberg is they're not a region that's how should I put it, very resilient in this regard. But yeah. Before we go on, I'm just going to check. It seems like I've got something in the chat. Go away. Stop it now. Oh, someone's just saying hi. Okay, never mind that. Well, now we can move on to our sort of more slow dive items. So these will be the ones that I have. Where are we going? Share screen. We're going to have a look. So Michael Atkins, very nice guy. This I do. He's a very friendly sort of character, and he. Why is the layout being so whack? There we go. That's better. Look at me in a little bubble. And our main issue is that the DA is pushing to basically, try and ban small parties. I mean, you hear Helen Zille whenever she's talking, complaining about these tiny little parties being kingmakers and disrupting coalitions. And it's true. She's not wrong. It can be very disruptive. But it also creates the idea is to basically make it almost impossible for anyone to organize resistance to the state and to the ruling party, of which the DA is effectively a part because they support all of the same policies. The difference is, and I think it's, look, I'm exaggerating there a little bit, but as we covered last week, the DA's got their alternative BEE, and they've designed this policy to be a failure. So they know that the ANC is not going to get behind it. They know that they're not going to be able to pass it in the legislature, but they're pushing it anyway because it looks good and it brings, it shows international investors, blah blah blah. But they basically want to just make sure that everything, even in the private sector, is forced to comply with United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, so that the central planning doctrines of the United Nations are chased up everywhere. Now, if you the link to this is in the description of the video, and you can go there and you can find that this little link over here that goes to the full PDF of Michael Atkins' submission to the Parliamentary Committee. And what's important here is that, I mean, look, Michael Atkins there's no one else who's really a better expert uh, on electoral affairs in South Africa. So if you want to know what's going on and you're on Twitter, or let's say you've got Google and you want to look up a few of the things that he's written, he's basically the guy you want to go to figure out, okay, is this the case? What should we worry about, and so on. And he's very nonpartisan. He sort of made it clear to me that he doesn't want to be seen as criticizing the DA in particular, just the policy. So I just want to underline that from him. He's very principled in that regard, and so I wouldn't want to get him in hot water, misrepresent him. But I think I should just read this. It's not long. It's an extract that he published on Twitter, because it sort of summarizes his argument. So I'm going to just read that out to you. But you should go to the article because it contains also links to the report, minority reports. But he's informed me that the parliamentary reports on this policy are actually extremely mendacious. So they've lied about a huge number of important issues. So I need to bring that up with him and write a separate article on that later. But for now, let's focus on this. The question of electoral thresholds has been raised in legislation proposed for local government elections. It is therefore necessary to address some of these key principles in respect of national and provincial elections. Essentially, there are various pragmatic justifications raised in favor of electoral thresholds. However, these have to be set against some core democratic and constitutional values, notwithstanding the fact that electoral thresholds are deemed appropriate in various other jurisdictions. One of the first concerns regarding electoral thresholds is that it disturbs proportionality, with the inevitable bias in favor of large parties that is true of the recalculations discussed below. The typical response to this concern is that sections 46 and 105 of the constitutions require an electoral system that results, in quotes, in general, in proportional representation, and that this therefore allows scope for some deviation. While this is true, it is also true that the constitutionality of deviations from proportionality has not been tested. At the very least, if any concrete proposal in this regard is considered, then there should be an investigation into the extent of the distortions from proportionality, and the outcomes of such intervention should be tested against the constitutional requirement. Because numbers are difficult for many, it should not therefore be the case that numerical considerations are disregarded in the contemplation of electoral systems. It's absurd to allow independent candidates to secure election, possibly with relatively low vote totals in some constituency elections, but to deny parties securing representation with far higher numbers of votes. This contradiction alone should end the discussion. The right to vote and the right to fair elections is significantly compromised when a noticeable number of votes are discarded. It's that simple. That is anathema in our constitutional dispensation. Obviously, the numbers of parties contesting elections would tend to diminish, and the number of votes thus discarded would tend to reduce over time. But this would come at the extreme cost of limiting the right to make political choices. In a diverse society, it's natural that smaller political parties may appeal to and hence represent the interests of various groups, at least partly on the basis of belief, religion, language, economic or employment status, or geographic or ethnic distribution. Other criteria, such as social mores, environmental, or other concerns, could also find expression in smaller political parties. Voter thresholds work as a direct counter to such direct representation of many different interests that may exist. They are also at odds with the sentiment of Section 236. A counter-argument might be that reducing our political space to a handful of parties could have the effect of forcing such parties to become a broader church in respect to these issues. But it is equally possible that diverse interests could be entirely lost in the process. I mean, this is a very polite way of putting it. I mean, look at the ANC and the DA. Do they care a jot what the policy preferences of their voters are? No, for them, it's all, superficial signaling. And it's only when people jump on them that they actually do anything about it. So Back to the article. In my submission to the COGTA Portfolio Committee in respect to the Municipal Structures Amendment Bill, I showed that a 1% vote threshold in the 2021 local government elections would result in the ANC gaining 64% of the forfeited seats while holding an aggregate of 52% of the original seats allocated, while the DA would gain 22.7% of the forfeited seats while holding 17.1% of the original seats. So essentially, he's saying that there would be a 15-point advance in ANC representation and a 5% advance in DA representation. Now, that's pretty substantial. So it's like each of them getting an additional third, slightly less than a third of their actual representation. I mean, it's enormous. I mean, you can see exactly why this exists. It's so that the two parties that dominate our electoral system get to govern alone and get to shed all of the other competitors, and get rid of competition. And I mean, this is the idea. I mean, Helen Zille's always wanted to merge the two parties so that she likes the idea of a one-party state. And she likes the idea that you can vote for little parties and you might be able to govern at the margins, but that's irrelevant. And the model that she uses, that she defers to, is Germany, where you've got this permanent cartel of establishment parties who decide everything in accordance to what the civil service tells them to do. And similar to what happens in the UK, you've only got a couple of parties. Civil service, including the intelligence service, will vet the political candidates and decide whether or not to sabotage their campaigns based on whether or not they align with the permanent interests of the state. And voters don't really get to have any say in the matter. Similarly to America, I mean, Donald Trump was an exception, but even he's been reined in order to call the dogs off him during his re-election last year. So this is generally what happens: is you have a state-managed system. But in South Africa, you haven't needed to have a state-managed system because you've got the ANC dominating the civil service as a dominant party system. No one's voting against them. But now controls need to be brought in to make sure that there's actually no change in the system. This is important. Helen Zille was noticing, 10 years ago, saying, okay, well, we've got the EFF. They're outside of us, and that's great because that allows the DA to enter the government as a junior coalition partner, and then we get to make things slightly more efficient while keeping the program on track. So this is kind of the perspective that you have to how modern states are run in democratic areas. They don't control everything. They don't directly intimidate, or bribe or whatever in order to get people to do things. They just systemically exclude anyone who's critical of the system or key strategic policies. And there are international players involved too, but that's where it gets murkier and more difficult to talk about. So, I mean, look, Michael Atkins talks here in the last section about constitutionality. And if you want to understand what's happening over here, there are actually two bills. And the one bill concerns national legislature, and the threshold hasn't been fully determined yet. And then the other one is local legislature. The local one's not too bad. I mean, it doesn't seem to be all that different. I mean, but what they're doing is they're saying that if you didn't have enough votes to get one seat already, you cannot get a seat from the leftover votes after the big parties have had their, taken up their share of the seats. Yeah, because at the moment what they do is there's a whole bunch of little parties that'll have slightly less than the amount to get one seat. But once the seats have been taken up by the biggest parties, they distribute them amongst the next biggest and next biggest and next biggest. And usually that's only 2 or 3 seats. But that's enough in the DA's mind to be a problem. And so those need to be excluded. Why is it? The layout here is Fong. So, where is our next? So I'm going to read this now. I didn't write this. I was hoping to have David on to help me with this with this article because he knows more of the context. But unfortunately, I'm just going to have to give it a go and see what the story is. David is very busy today. He's been hit with some crises at work and so on. I'm a freelancer who works from home, so I'm much more flexible. But here we have Alderman Andrews under fire as Blaauwberg residents defend AF 1117. Blaauwberg's AF 1117 dispute. Yes, okay. So he says it's a test of credibility for Cape Town's political leadership. This is a 277 hectare stretch of state owned land within the UNESCO designated Cape West Coast Biosphere Reserve. So it's another nature reserve that's being snatched up by illegal settlers. And there's a clash between the city council and a residents' coalition called the Community Representation for Blaauwberg. The CRB, that's the community group, they formed last year after so-called exclusionary practice by the Blaauwberg Spatial Association, its members include engineers, planners, and lawyers. Their message is that the city's draft Big Bay Local Spatial Development Framework is mainly about, as they say, city-driven or community-driven, but it's about, they're driving housing for immigrants from migrants from the Eastern Cape instead of, and I mean, it will be migrants from the Eastern Cape. It usually is because, well, and the housing list is for nonsense, So the city plans to propose GR2 zoning, 5-story apartment blocks of up to 120 dwellings per hectare for much of the site, which lies inside Kuberg's 16-kilometer urgent protection zone. What? This is insane. This is like absolutely insane. This is such density will render emergency evacuation impossible. Okay, sorry, I'm reading this for the first time because I really expect to, because bloody hell. So the CRB points to a 2017 city report acknowledging that evacuation times were already approaching prescribed limits. Andrew's written proposal to the CRB shows ignorance or complicity. He confirmed that a proposal was what the hell? Oh my goodness. So he ignores 4,000 public objections. And ignores all the procedures. And beyond governance, the ecological stakes are high. The AF sits within a critical biodiversity area. You fucking mental. Yeah. Concerns about the trajectory of the DA-led city council are spreading across Cape Town. In Fisher last week, 1,400 residents signed a poll opposing the unethical densification of the Deep South. And their frustration reflects a broader rejection of the city's integrated development plan developed by the council, which places densification at the center of Cape Town's urban strategy. Well, the DA's formal structures are separate from so like all of those things where you see a tiny apartment that costs like 2 million rand. Part of the reason is that the DA has been for 2 decades now, nearly. They've been pushing this policy of trying to make the city as densely populated as possible. That's been their maximum drive, which is why they do very little about land invasion. So they, when they build council houses, they're these tiny shit boxes with microscopic windows. It's about what is the tiniest space you can possibly cram everyone into. This is the idea. So instead of building nice suburbs or mixed development areas or anything like this, it's just cram everyone in. Yeah. So yeah, this is miserable. I don't know what to say. Yeah, that's depressing as all hell. I mean, what is wrong with this guy? I just can't. I don't know what to say. This is just nonsense. Okay. So now our big one. Oh, I'm so sorry about this, guys. This is going to be a very long. This is going to be a long section, I'm afraid. I'm going to try and run through it in as short a time as possible. But effectively, what you are going to get is a lot of procedural detail in this. So maybe I'll skip over as much as I possibly can. But this article is a very long and detailed one about what central bank digital currencies are. It shows what. So this took me a while. This took me most of a day to put together. But I mean, this is policies I've looked at a number of times, so it's not difficult. But basically, what you're looking at over here is the DA and the ANC together have agreed that the most important thing they can do is focus on digitizing the government. So we noticed earlier in this update, I pointed to what's going on with the smart cities and a couple of little things like that. But biometric identification, very important. Department of Home Affairs and Leon Schreiber is very big into this digitization, biometric ID. But also, he's privatizing it in bringing in the big central banks, the big banking cartels. So the big banking cartel is like a cluster of about 5 or 6 banks, including Capitec. Now, Capitec wasn't normally in the big four, but it's been included largely because, in my opinion, of the enormous amount of money they've dumped into the DA as their biggest donor, one of their biggest donors at least, for the past 10, 15 years. So you'll have Department of Home Affairs functions privatized out to them. You can get your DA, your ID at private banks. And they get, in exchange, I think, a lot of access to your personal information. Not that they didn't already have a great deal, but it's not great. So, but this is combined with another policy. So you've got also, as you remember, like universal tax system harmonization across the West. And now you've got central bank digital currencies. Now, central bank digital currencies, they're like a blockchain technology, but where blockchain stuff like Bitcoin tends to be decentralized, CBDCs are centralized. So the ledger can be edited from one point, and that's from the central bank. And the central banking system, there are only 3 countries that are not under control of the Bank for International Settlements, and that is Cuba, Russia, and North Korea. So everyone else is part of the setup. And the South African Reserve Bank is the main guy for us. So, yeah, I think what we're going to do is just go through this a little bit. I'm trying to shortcut the section because I have to get to the Afrikaners and the stupid Durko project. So what we've been seeing already is over here, you've got one of the points I started out with is how over time governments kind of get bloated because they have to stabilize the various patronage networks that give them legitimacy. So there's the general population, they get welfare spending, they get all kinds of things. Then you've got business wants certain concessions, subsidies, policies, infrastructure development, preferential tax exemptions, things like this. So over here, what I pointed out is, okay, so here's what the government spending by function of a share of GDP for the OECD countries is all about 40%, right? So nearly half, or half exactly, of the government in the West is of the economy in the West is government, and then social spending as a proportion of GDP is like a third or a quarter to a third in most countries. And it's just growing. I mean, historically it's minimal, but now it's just spaffing money, and it's never going to come down. And then what I do is I point out the organizations which are responsible: your Bank of International Settlements, IMF, WEF, UN, EU, and G20. So all of these are the main policy-making places, and then they force it through implementation onto the various member states. There was no criticism or objection from any member states of the United Nations to the key developments of these elements, because this helps them produce more direct control and surveillance over their population. Our CBDCs, what makes them different from regular digital currency, as we understand it, is that you can directly interfere. Your money doesn't belong to you in any sense. And the banks, the central banking system, and the government, which works in partnership with them, can shut you out of the entire economy. They can also tell you what to purchase. They can control when you can purchase and make your money expire on a monthly basis to stimulate expenditure in the economy. So you don't own anything. You don't have control over your own household budget. You don't have anything. That's the basic point here. And it allows you to do central economic planning at an enormous and fine-grained scale. It allows enormous amounts of corporate corruption to occur at a global scale. It allows you to manipulate state economies very directly. It's extremely pernicious. And then I go through sort of how it formed, like what it was in response to early attempts and early policy proposals. I go through some of the big conferences and documents that contribute to the formation of the project. Here you can see test examples of where the policy was implemented and what happened, what the pushback was. And here you've got South Africa's roadmap and how far along we are. And we've been dragging our feet a little bit, but we're getting there. And then I go through how a lot of these policies are sort of how the influence network works, because it's not like we're strong armed into this exactly, but there's a lot of pressure from NGOs. And what the NGOs do, what a lot of them do, and there's a whole chunk of them that are responsible in part for drafting the Blaauwberg Act, the NHI, all of this, and they're connected to the United Nations. They're also connected to a network of intelligence tied, state and state intelligence tied NGOs that are funded by European and American governments. And so, Bella, NHI, Climate Change Act, tax reforms, all of this. One of the things that they do is that a lot of these organizations do is that they've got SDG trackers. So the social development goals are this huge complex matrix of policy goal trackers, key performance indicators, and so on that checks for compliance with the United Nations Central Planning Doctrine, and then they'll go through all of your policies and they'll tag every policy and every item in your budget and rank it, and then they give you a score, and then they pressurize you. Oh, you're not meeting this, this, and this. Do you hate the poor? Do you hate black people? Do you hate women? Do you hate the gays? Do you hate the planet? Do you want it to die? All of that, and they use that as leverage, and then they leverage international treaties, and they use lawfare to bust up whatever you're doing and disrupt your governing process until you give them what they want. And they've been very effective at making forcing Eskom to walk back a lot of its important infrastructural upgrades, so that the system that they use is conforming to the Western green energy model, which is not really ideal for us. Part of the reason that they like the green energy model is that it's a globally distributed supply system, so it's impossible to exert any kind of local autonomy over your energy systems. That's why, for some bizarre reason, nuclear energy is outside of the balance. They've softened their stance on gas, because despite the fact that it's carbon based, it is mainly an American resource. And the key economies that are using gas resources from outside of America, Russia, for example, America has managed to sabotage most of either the infrastructure or the policy frameworks and supply chains that feed into that. So it's about a global control mechanism for the energy system, and nuclear and coal are the enemy, because those two sources are the only ways that you can have undisruptible control over your own energy resources. And there's a lot of cooking of the books. For the main score that people use to price these things is something called the Lazard's per unit levelized cost of energy. There are a lot of factors in the supply chain that are deliberately excluded from wind and solar and so on in order to make this the case. So you can see across the board, whether you're looking at the affirmative action stuff or the ideological training stuff or financial reforms. I think part of the reason the FATF, which is run by the G20, has rescinded our grey list status is because they've seen progress since the GNU on a lot of the issues, on a lot of the reforms that they want. This is not to say that we have become any less a home to terror financing or transnational crime or drug shipments or anything. I don't think any of that has really changed. What's happened is that we've decided that we're going to conform to these central control mechanisms. That's what I see, because the G20 and then the FATF, by virtue of that, is going to go. Now, at the end, I say, okay, well, look, what's going to happen if we get Cape independence is likely we're going to have to bend over for some of these, depending on the state of the state of things. I have no idea. I'd like to be able to say no, but being realistic, we have to think about this. Now, my long view of history is that Cape independence, if it doesn't work, the worst case scenario is really that we've delayed our situation by a generation or two, and in that time, you've got the ability to build up settlements in the rest of the country that are going to be self-sufficient, functional, and culturally homogenous. And Irania is like a little test case for some of these things, but Irania itself cannot be the savior of, say, Afrikaners or minorities more broadly, and neither can the corporate gated communities, because as I pointed out, they're all pushing for the biometric systems and the digital currency, which are going to make things make it basically impossible for you to buck the state. What you need is physical currency or Bitcoin systems or things like this, or an alternative token system like Irania runs. And you need to have contiguous territory, collectively owned, so on and so forth. And these things can be done non-violently. They can be done gradually through market mechanisms, through community engagement and collective action. Can be done. And the ideal situation is one where you have this dysfunctional state bureaucracy in a country that can't really get its shit together, sort of pockets where you've got autonomy underneath it, because this way you can escape the enforcement of the global system and trade with it through any means that you can get your hands on. And because you're generally law-abiding and you're not a major player in the international system, and in fact, in a way, you become a guarantor of internal trade security by holding key nodes in internal trade networks in South Africa. You can become this where these plans just don't apply to your residents. So my idea is sort of that by pursuing the anchor town strategy, solidarity, if they decided to take this seriously, which I don't know if they will, and I largely blame TNC ILO for this, but that's a long, complicated criticism that I have that is for another time. Part of the reason that this is they're so exciting is that in our grasp we have in these minority movements the ability to actually completely resist not only local domination but international domination. So that's an important area to look at. Before we get on to our final and headline story, which is the Afrikaners at the end, we're going to look at South Africa losing its medical specialists. So I caught a little bit of stray commentary about from a parliamentary exchange around Limpopo, and Health Minister Aaron Motsoaledi getting criticized by the EFF because there are no neurologists in Limpopo. Oh, there's one neurologist in Limpopo. Where's our medical specialists? Right. So then I started having a look at it and I thought, well, okay, well, what is the state of this? And let's get some stats. So a recent parliamentary debate, I hired Limpopo, blah, blah, blah. So a single neurologist, 6 million people. So South Africa has only 277 neurologists nationwide, and just 15 of these are in the public sector. The shortage is not confined to neurology. South Africa's doctor-to-patient ratio at 0.13 per 100,000 lags far behind the World Health Organization's recommended 1 per 100,000. Across specialties, the public sector employs a fraction of available professionals, roughly 20% of anesthetists, 15% of psychiatrists, and 25% of radiologists. It's grim out there if you don't have access to private. So the EFF MP Matibe Mohlala displayed the most conspicuous outrage of the situation, arguing as usual that the poor suffer while wealthier citizens access swift private care. Motsoaledi countered that public facilities serve 86% of the population. Wow, rejecting claims of breakdown and pinning hopes on the NHI. I mean, to think about that for a second, that's insane. So you've got 85% of the population and only a quarter of your specialists for serving that population. Why would you go into the public sector? You'd be insane too. I mean, imagine the workload that these doctors face in these situations. I mean, I remember when I last went into the hospital because my kid tried to grab my glasses off my face, and I turned and got stabbed in the eye with an aloe, because I've got these big tall aloes in my garden. So I've got this scratched cornea, and if I'm dehydrated sometimes because the cornea didn't heal properly, it'll hurt, like it'll be agonizing. So because there's like a little rough patch on my cornea, and so if I'm dehydrated, it'll scratch like, it's so horrible. Anyway, going into there, like almost all of the doctors you see are student doctors. And like this is in one of the best run hospitals in the Western Cape. So it's like public hospitals in the Western Cape. Like I don't use private because it's bloody expensive, right? I don't earn a huge amount of money, so you go in there, you get to see it. I've seen my wife gave birth both times in public hospital, and the nurses are the most atrocious human beings you've ever met. Like rude, inconsiderate, openly racist towards minorities. I mean, just grim people. Not all of them. There was one lady who was very reasonable and patient with me in my, but broadly speaking, just awful people and completely incompetent. I mean, it's just like, nurses are broadly considered to be more competent than doctors in most places, because like the day-to-day stuff that they handle gives them an understanding of not doing basic stupid stuff and understanding how patients work and understanding the paperwork better. But it's dismal. Anyway, no, it's making. Where we go. So Aaron Motsoaledi, he defended this as a part of a global scarcity. Maybe not. I mean, look, Nigeria and Algeria, okay, have held onto their medical professionals as well or better than we have, and we're way wealthier than them. We should, per capita, we should be retaining a much larger proportion of doctors. But you got BEE, you got racial quotas in the employment equity. Beg your pardon, employment equity, so racial quotas in hiring and in educational institution placements. So it chokes us out. I mean, look, India, which is like the per capita, income in India is dismal, but they've got 0.7 doctors per thousand. In Brazil and Mexico, they've got 2 doctors per 1,000 people, and part of the problem is that the it's working conditions, it's bad pay, and racial quotas. So, and we've got between 4,000 doctors and 11,000 nurses leaving every year. So that's pretty bad. Budget constraints exacerbate the problem. The provinces are citing insufficient funds to hire despite 1,800 unemployed junior doctors. I mean, of course, the ones that remain are not as high quality as the ones who go for the most part. I mean, not always. I mean, some of them remain are doing it because they just don't want to go overseas, but most of them are where they are because they're not as hireable. I mean, like I had a look at Reddit and sort of Reddit threads on this, and there was one who said like over 40 doctors applying for one registrar post. And they're burned out covering for their mentors because like a lot of the doctors are like aging out now. A lot of them are over 60. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know what to say. It's a pretty swak situation. But now I'm going to share this is going to be Marula Media. Come on, you silly sausage. Why are you not loading picture? Come on, bugger. Bum, 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 bum. There we go. Hello. Let's give our friends in the solidarity movement a bit of gas over here. So this is very interesting. So I mean, like some of this was mentioned by Kali Kriel on. And it's been a big storm. I mean, what I noticed is that you've got like some of the DA orbiters. The DA orbiters, like, Gareth van Onsen. Gareth van Onsen, a very smart guy, very competent, very good at his job, which is polling. But I mean, as you'll notice, there's an article linked in the description to this stream about 4%. It's an important figure that is always left off of his reports, and that is the proportion of the black population that votes for the DA. So it's always in single digits, almost always under 5%. The only place where you get around 10% of the black population voting the DA is in Johannesburg. So elsewhere, it's like below 5%. In the Western Cape, it's 1%. I mean, the black population here is extremely racist. Yeah. So what's happening over here is that we have, I mean, like, if you haven't been paying attention, you've been living under a rock. So there's 44 of these, like, academics and state employees. I mean, but it includes, like, ANC members, like Gerard Koornhof. Now, the Koornhofs were a long, boring, corrupt NP family that crossed over to the ANC in the 90s. And then you've got like an old former diplomat and stuff like that. But all of these are like it's like a very particular cluster of formerly pro-NP guys who moved over to being pro-ANC. And then you've got a bunch of like I don't even know what to call Piet Kroukamp. He's a very bitter and twisted individual. But a lot of them have like publicly said at many stages that they don't consider themselves Afrikaners. They think that Afrikaners should die out or be dispersed or lose their culture in every way they possibly can. Stop identifying with it. Just go with black national extent. I mean, Pierre de Vos over here, he wants to see the most radical version of land reform possible, most radical form of racial discrimination possible, everything. And, it's interesting that a number of these people behind this are homosexuals. And I say this with caution because you've got to remember that, under apartheid it was very conservative, and so they made a lot of enemies out of people who are gay. Not that that's always the case. I mean, you've got Juan van Schalkwyk, who's in the Vryheidsfront Plus, was, he's a fairly reactionary guy. But a lot of them sort of held a grudge against the sort of like Christian nationalism of the time, and so you've got these. They're often the sort of progressive gay members of the community can often be the most heavily anti-minority groups, understandably. And what you see is. I mean, Pierre de Vos, very radical. I mean, he just doesn't want anyone to be able to inherit any wealth. He wants like 100% inheritance tax. Like, he thinks that's going to, like, how is that enforceable? How is that enforceable? You just have like people passing on their property to their kids while they're alive. It doesn't work. It just makes things crazy. And then, Max Dupre, all of them. The thing is that they were organized by a woman called Karen Berger. She's employed in the office of the Director General of DIRCO, International Relations Department, our diplomatic department. And she's a former state security agent. or current. I don't even know. It's hard to tell if people are former or current, but she did a lot of work in Washington and so on. And she, when she was interviewed about this, she denied her involvement, and then they showed her leaked text messages from the group. And then she was like, "Oh yeah, I was involved, but it really wasn't my idea, actually." Despite the fact that the conversation it shows that she drafted the original open letter and so on. And this is okay: anti-Trump, anti-solidarity, anti-AfriForum, usual stuff. And a lot of people are making hay with it, but it's very clearly a state influence operation. And it's kind of marvelous in a way that this has actually happened, because now you've got a list of people, a prominent list of people that you can check against, and you say, well, if you ever find an Afrikaner commenting something that's supposed to be sort of reasonable pro-state or whatever, just check, are they on the list? And if they're on the list, you immediately disregard their opinion. And it's a really good communication tool for excluding irrelevant and compromised, corrupt voices in society. So if anyone who's been a signature of this letter, you can immediately go, oh, well, they're evil morons. So I mean, Pete Krookamp hates Afrikaners and Afrikanerdom, despite him being of it, because he's better than everyone else. He hates Christianity, and he thinks everyone who believes in God is stupid and deserves to be rejected socially. But a lot of the members of this group are also from the Dutch Reformed Church. Not really Christians, I don't think. I think a lot of them, because the reason I say this, and I know that's an egregious thing to say, but there are a lot of them who have been working very hard to try and soften the church's stances on, biblical doctrine, particularly supernatural doctrine, virgin birth, all of this kind of stuff, because they believe that having any kind of fixed tenets in the religion is exclusionary, and that the religion needs to be whittled down to a basic ethnical code. The synod was taken over in the 90s, and they started pushing, the usual sort of woke international stuff, like transgenderism, being pro homosexuality, the progressive racial stuff, Nelson Mandela being given equal status in the on the pulpit to Jesus Christ. I went to the Inge where I am, and they had like a big, United Nations thing up in the front instead of the cross. This is the kind of people that you're talking about. And look, the Inge has been supporting and infiltrated by state agents. The British infiltrated them and posted British and pro-British Germanies everywhere to make sure that the church had, crown loyalists. When the state transitioned to the system that they used for the 20th century, the apartheid system, they pushed a particular interpretation of the Hamitic curse. Like the sons of Ham are cursed to be working for the sons of Shem and Japheth, and so you've got all of these big theological positions of the church, or the Inge Kerk. They are always aligned with the state. Okay, and so the state always manipulates them. So they're essentially a state church whose primary purpose is making sure that believers are steered into conformity with the state's preferred transformation project, whatever it happens to be. And they've been pushing reconciliation since the late 70s, early 80s, when the state decided to start dismantling apartheid. And then afterwards, they start pushing transformation when the new system comes in. And the public's always a couple of decades behind what the elite want them to be like. And so it takes a while to catch up. But now we've got the Beter Einders, a couple of guys who are connected both to the church, but also to sort of international influence networks, like, Robin DiAngelo's critical race theory, grifting stuff. And, when you watch them in interviews, they're very conscious about their language, and they know that if they push the work stuff too hard, and they'll actually like enunciate their thought process as well. So it's like really transparently cynical, that they're trying to get Afrikaners to sort of feel okay with accepting genocidal rhetoric and accepting dispossession and accepting racial discrimination, and like, well, we should just take it and so on, not criticize any of this. And I think it's generally speaking the attitude of these guys. It's very, very slimy, and they're very intelligent, they're very well spoken and everything, but they will say, oh, well, the problem with woke is it goes too far because there's no room for forgiveness. So they're sort of saying, well, yeah, it's okay that it's extremely stringently doctrinaire and racially recriminating, and you're held guilty for crimes of your ancestors and all this kind of stuff. But what we really need to do is just sort of like allow people to feel like they're okay, as long as we can get people in an emotional state where they accept this particular form of discrimination or oppression or whatever. That's the aim. So they branded themselves as Beter-Einers, as competition with Bitter-Einers. Now, Bitter-Einers have been sort of chipping away at the solidarity support base from the right. And their position is, no, we're the ones who are serious about getting power. I don't think so. They've had one little success this year in the courts, but it's symbolic. And most of their sort of protest actions or whatever, it's hard to see anything that really shifts the needle at all. I mean, at least Solidarity is building stuff. I have my disagreements. I don't think they're doing enough, but they're doing the most of anyone else. So you've got Beter-Einers and Bitter-Einers as these tiny little guys on the side who are trying to chip away at the big mountain from left and right. But it's very, very clear that this is an effort by the state to try and get Afrikaners to bend the knee. And it's absolutely just, it's insane. And it should be an enormous scandal that they're using taxpayer, state officials are getting involved in this nonsense. It should be an enormous scandal. But I look, it remains to be seen what the DA want to say. But some of their orbiters, like Gareth van Onselen, have been they've been so delighted to see this letter published, and they're like, look at that. Look at how it's upsetting the Afrikaners. This is the best thing that's ever happened. The more something upsets an Afrikaner, the better. So Gareth van Onselen is clearly in this category as well, which is why he won't publish the 4% figure, because, well, black people, broadly speaking, are minorities. And look, they have their reasons. They have historical grievances. They want different outcomes. You can account for almost all of this prejudice in terms of very normal common sense factors, which I understand. However, remains the case that you're never going to fix South Africa while the DA remains the DA. And you're not going to fix South Africa if the DA changes either. The DA as a vehicle is a vehicle for stabilizing and capturing the minorities, right? This is why, and so look, it remains to be seen what their comments about this is going to be. So they're probably going to have to say something. They're aware that in order to keep control of the voter base that they have, they can't alienate a significant amount of whites, because white people over-index in the voter participation by a factor of 1.67. So they are 2/3 more likely to vote than any other citizen, which means that, we are 12-13% of the voting age population, despite the fact that we're 7-8% of the population. And so our opinion matters, particularly given that that's like half the DA's vote. I think it remains to be so. Like, keep an eye this week, see what the DA say about this, see how they try and frame it, because they're also going to be reluctant to say anything negative about this letter, but now they have to, because it's clearly, it's a state propaganda project. So they can't say nothing now, because they will, but keep an eye on what they say and think about the tone in which they pitch it, and think about that kind of stuff. Anyway, we're done with the presentation section. So I am just going to go through the tiny little list of questions I've gotten so far and have a chin wag. And then anything else that comes up or hits my mind, I'll mention it quickly, but I'm not going to take much more time out. But if you're online, please dump any questions into the chat, or let me just check Twitter, because Twitter might have a couple of commentarinos. Let's have a look. No, nothing there yet. Okay. And yeah, nothing there. Yeah, nothing there yet. Let's just go. Let's look at the YouTube questions, because they're going to be a bit better. So, here we go. Johan Vihan. White South Africans have been emigrating at huge rates for decades, and it's only increasing. So I am confused as to why the ANC is suddenly uneasy about the refugee program. I can answer that. It's very simple. It's delegitimizing. So us immigrating, it's like, oh, well, those people are racists. They're leaving because they don't like redress and whatever. If another state is recognizing the process of immigration as being caused by racial discrimination, it's a diplomatic affair. So they're not worried about us leaving, because look, they have capital controls. You do have to pay exit tax on your assets. So yeah, they already have those controls in place. They're somewhat worried, but they're not like, they don't consider it detrimental. The problem is that if you have enough of the minority population defecting psychologically and politically from the system, eventually you're going to have meaningful resistance as opposed to qualified and small scale resistance, and then that becomes a real problem. And you said, so Johan Vian, you've continued and said, I've noticed more black people are moving to the DA in support of Helen Ziller. Most of the growth in the DA poll numbers seems to be coming from black South Africans. Careful with that. So last election, that was the DA's very decent performance for the DA. They still only got 4% at the national election. Recent polls have changed. And look, Frans Cronje's rationalization of this is that, they've realized now that the DA aren't a racist party. I think to myself, well, maybe. It's certainly possible. And you're seeing a lot of black voters and supporters turning up to rallies in Johannesburg. But Johannesburg has always been anomalous. So they've gotten in 2016, 15% of the black population voted DA. Okay. It's significant in Johannesburg. So Johannesburg is the one place where black people are liberal enough to vote for the DA in double-digit numbers. And it doesn't happen anywhere else. But also there's something that, if you pay attention to old Frans Cronje interviews, what he'll point out is that in between elections, especially after a national election, you get a big bump in black polled support for the DA. And it always happens. But it always evaporates. They haven't been able to make this stick before, but it's happened for every national election for the past 10, 15, I think, years. And so it's hard to say whether it really is a meaningful change. Proof of the pudding is in the eating. We're going to have to wait for the election. But I think, Helen Ziller will see big turnout in Johannesburg. I think she'll do well. I think she'll get a coalition that she wants, well, thinks she wants. And I think that, look, they're targeting Panyaza Lesufi with a motion of no confidence in the provincial legislature now. Could go either way. We'll see how that works out. And look, if it goes well and they get rid of Panyaza Lesufi, then you've removed a key player. Not completely, but you've blunted his potency a little bit. Who's going to be a big influence over running of Johannesburg. He's a very important player. Don't disregard him. So, yeah. Growth of poll numbers coming from Black South Africans. I don't think so. It's possible. I don't want to rule it out because it's actually real. It's a realistic possibility. Things have changed. We're in a new moment now, so don't rule it out. But also don't get too excited about it either. Just wait and see. I'd say. Recon Game says in Germany, a party must have a 5% minimum representation into the election. I don't like this. I think it's bad. But it depends what you want to do. So if you want to control the system and keep dissidents from having a voice in parliament, it's great. If you're one of those dissidents, it's not great. You know what I mean? So it always depends on who's the winner, who's the loser, and which category you find yourself in. So, yeah, it's Europe has a problem with party cartels because they have proportional representation. So you get these, as I said, controlled system. Afrikaners have been bending the knee for decades already. Not quite. I think it's defeatism. It's not submission. There are a lot of people who have submitted and have enthusiastically participated, but I don't know. I get the impression it's mainly just sort of lack of self-confidence and fear of consequences. So a lot of people hate the system. They just don't know what to do about it because they feel weak. For me, it's up to Solidarity. Solidarity has to grow, has to increase their testicular fortitude and make more radical moves. Bernard, A.K. Herbert, or Bernard Duck Herbert. Am I to take it that these 44 are not the people who Charlize Theron said still talk Afrikaans? I noticed that as well. It's so bizarre. It's like, what kind of Afrikaner is like Charlize Theron? Well, there are only 44 of them. There's something. Oh, yeah. Anyway, Johan Vihan again. Are you not concerned that the refugee program will drain out huge amounts of opposition to the ANC? I think it might. But the numbers have been restricted somewhat. So I don't know. It's only 7,500 places in total for the refugee program now this year. And then of those, Afrikaners get priority. That's the new position. And so it's like actually not a big deal anymore. And I think great, because look, America taking a symbolic quantity of Afrikaner refugees, that's like maybe a couple hundred a year or whatever, that's actually great because it becomes an important signal and it puts pressure on the ANC, but it's not big enough to actually change the balance of forces on the ground here in the negative direction for Afrikaners. That's the ideal balance for us interest wise. So I personally don't like this refugee program as general, precisely for this reason, is that I don't want to see too many people leaving the country. Because it's an old Sun Tzu thing. It's like if you put people's back up against the wall, they fight harder, and you've got to allow your enemies an exit route. It's a big point in Sun Tzu and all that. If you do not allow them an exit route, you're going to suffer way heavier losses, even if you're going to win. So you don't want to trap your enemy. You think it's a good. I mean, like, have you ever cornered a dog that doesn't want to be cornered? Doesn't want to be cornered. Like, even if they're the most cowardly dog that you've ever met, like nerves to shreds, whatever, will run away. If they feel like they're cornered, they go ballistic. So it's one of those things where you have to feel a certain kind of firmness at your back behind you in order to keep punching. And so I think, it's the absence of like a hard backstop that is causing us to think that we can get away with it. And like, look, Afrikaners are retreating into the private sector and into mutual aid societies like Solidarity. But it's difficult. I mean, look, Christian Ehlers, the problem for someone like me with a BSc Chem degree going nowhere, yet I was part of building the Cheetah and Royfok. Wow, okay. Only thing to do is take my brains elsewhere. Look, I mean, I can't tell you what to do with your life personally. I'm a political analyst. What you're doing there. That's a private decision. I can only tell you what works politically in our interest. That's what I take care of. I can't really give you advice on that. But look, it's one of the reasons we've been so resilient is that we took it upon ourselves to start our own companies and do our own thing. Broadly speaking, a lot of us are entrepreneurial, and then you keep the company small and you hyper specialize and then trade amongst other hyper specialized minority owned companies. So you do in order to keep things going. Some people make a lot of money, some people do well, some people don't, as the case may be. But you got really interesting things happening as a result, like. I mean, one of the reasons Nelspruit's interesting to me is that whole area in Secunda and everything. You got a lot of engineers and whatever who are building small light aircraft, firearms, all other kinds of small arms and self-defense systems and everything. And so there's a sort of like small. There are no jobs for white metallurgists. Well, I mean, look, again, I can't tell you, but like just from a purely political standpoint, like what would serve the general interest, the patriotic option, whether or not that's what you want to do, I don't want to tell you what to do again, from a personal perspective, but politically, the right move would be to get people like yourself to into projects that work locally. New startups, new small companies that are well connected with the solidarity network that can exploit your talents properly, or and so on. And I think what was I going to say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What's going on with me? Coffee's wearing off, I think. But I mean, look, ideal scenario is all of this talent gets trapped and turned into small production and innovative production and things like that. And even if you're not working in your specific special, like, look, dude, I trained as an EU bureaucrat. That was what my degree was, right? It's like I'm down here running, small scale propaganda operations and doing freelance research documents for NGOs and weird people. So the where you end up, I don't know. I can't tell you. I mean, like if you want to live a good, nice, luxurious life, like the boomer generation expected, which fair enough and all that. Yeah, go overseas, go work in Dubai. It doesn't matter. But I mean, I do think that there are little niches out there that are like exploitable potentially. I don't know what it's like getting into them as a person in any kind of specialized field, because I don't know. I don't have experience running a business. I don't have experience as a technical expert. So I imagine it could be really difficult, challenging, and like a little bit scary from a financial perspective. But um, yeah, all I can do is I need to give you the political perspective. So yeah. Uh, Johan Vian again. I think I'm going to stop in like a couple of minutes, by the way. So I'm not going to take every question. In case any new ones come up, I don't want to make people think that I'm going to just keep answering this forever. But yeah, I think the new employment equity will do massive damage to our numbers, says Vian. Yes. Yeah, I think it could. I think also the fact that they're going after NGOs now could hurt solidarity in AfriForum if they're not careful. And I mean, like I when I was doing papers for them, I kind of warned them about this, and I said, look, they are eventually going to come for you, and you don't have a contingency plan. You don't have what it takes to actually sort of say, yeah, we're just going to ignore the law. Because I mean, what are you going to do when police show up at your offices? You're not going to chase them away. They're not, they're going to make a big deal out of it that you're flouting the law. What are you going to do? So Christine says, yeah, I ran a factory, high cost, but the BEE would want their share. I mean, look, it's that 49% business. It's that 49 employees business. You bump up against that ceiling. And employment equity even applies below that threshold, as I understand it. Look, I mean, I have a good friend who's the sort of labor relations guy for a company out there in Atlantis, and like it's hard trying to keep the whole act together. I mean, fortunately, his bosses are very happy to let him play hardball with the unions and give them all hell. Not everyone is so inclined. But yeah, I mean, like if you're in a highly specialized field, I mean, one of the things that I would do is if you really want to get involved in small business and keeping outside of the BEE stuff, contact Sakeliga. I mean, Sakeliga are very, very serious about this stuff, and they have a lot of strategies for getting around and resisting these regulations. So talk to them, and they will sort you out. They have consultants. They're like, this is what they do. This is their whole thing. And if you're struggling with any kind of labor issues, the guys to talk to are NEASA, because NEASA, like everyone talks about, oh well, like everyone's got a what's it called? Everybody's got like labor consultants or anything. The difference with the NEASA is that Gerard Papenfuss is crazy. Like he's a really hardcore guy, and he hates unions. And I mean, I love that about him. So like you got to pick like partners in this that are going to help you out. So uh, yeah. Sorry, because you're asking if he's ANC. No, he's not in the unions. This friend of mine, um, he's a labor consultant for a company, and he's about blitzing the unions. I think the group that have control of the shop floor where he is are MEIBC. So, but they're in deep trouble. They're in deep trouble, and some of the shenanigans they've gotten up to recently have been hilarious to listen to. I mean, just absolute amateur hour stuff, and even about like veteran people who just got like way too emotionally like overconfident in their strategies and botched huge negotiations. So, yeah, no, but labor relations is a whole other question. But yeah, so it's been a nice, rich weekend full of learning about institutional dynamics and thingamajigs. Thanks for tuning in, the few that you are. I know those numbers look tiny, but like, so I have a channel of my own that's on my name that I barely use. It's like only if I've got like a special thing or I'm working on an idea or whatever, like I'll do a little stream or something. And I generally get like 50 to 80 people live when I post on there, even though I almost never do, because I've got like 3K subscribers or whatever it was. On this channel, I get very little because it's very new. But my impression is that I mean, the first couple of streams, you got like one or two people tuning in, if that, per stream. So now we've got about a dozen. So I reckon current rate of increase should be up to 100 in a few weeks' time. Live viewers, and then it'll be all right. But I do want to keep these updates as a long form focused discussion, because part of the problem with a lot of these channels that are coming up, and I know this is much less entertaining, but the point for me is I try to keep things focused on the Western Cape, because a lot of these small local stories will get completely ignored by everybody. Again, you want to actually try and go through some policy documents, and I'm hoping that over time I will be able to clear space in my schedule for things like actually reviewing ongoing policy documents and things like that, and laws and so on. That's not really up to date at the moment, but at the moment we're just going to focus on trying to just keep abreast of what's happening in the week, which is it can be challenging enough, because a lot of the international tax harmonization stuff, like it's barely mentioned anywhere, and then I don't have room to take any in-depth treatment, because again, I'm also not a chartered accountant, and so But yeah, and yes, Christine, I'm aware the manufacturing industry is dead in Cape Town. This is one of the things I'll say in parting. Just a brief comment on Alan Winde is he is actually, as far as I'm aware, the only member of the DA who cares about manufacturing. Like, he's been really, really trying with this little special economic zone of his, and he's daft on a few points. Like, sure, but everyone else in the DA is just like, screw manufacturing, screw any kind of like industrial, any kind of economic development. All we care about is finance, real estate, and tourism. Everything else just can go to the dogs. That's the DA for you. Like, it's really just they're the grimmest, most superficial, short-termist, narrow interest wankers. There's just no seriousness about looking after the economy. They do not care. They just do not care about anything that'll happen over a 5-year horizon. It's literally just, are we meeting social development goals, KPIs? Forget all of this. It's just like wealth redistribution and short-term financial gains. That's it. That's all they care about. It's really dismal. And they don't care about the negative consequences of their policies. They don't think about them. It's not important. It's all macro scale, central, top down, stupid shit. I hate it so much. But Alan Winde, he does care. I mean, he's not a very deep thinker. He's not very based. He's not like a strong man. He's not a, but he is in a funny sort of way like a serious civil servant. And I remember there was this Digicon that I was on, digital conference. He doesn't do many of those anymore, but there was a while where he was like very keen to do them. It was like a big PR venture he was doing. And we were looking at like, how he's doing with like, solar panels and all that stuff. And I was one of like a dozen journalists in the audience, but there were only 6 questions asked and 5 of them were mine. So he ended up answering all of them. And I asked him a question, and I said, look, you guys have been in charge since 2009. Why didn't you start? Like, load shedding was already a thing then. Why didn't you start doing something about it then? And one thing that you never see in veteran politicians is like them dropping their mask. And I saw him drop his mask. And he was like sitting very like attentively in his chair, listening to questions and responding with like prefab answers. And when I asked this, he just went like, like that whole thing. And then he said, when he came in the economic department that year, it was the first thing he pushed for. He was really keen to make sure that we generated electricity, stop load shedding, make sure the Cape holds onto it. And the party hierarchy, all of the buggers who were in charge then, told him no. They told him no. Don't do that. Trust the ANC to fix it. I mean, can you imagine? And so in my mind, I listened to that, and it gave me, like, that little insight gave me an appreciation of the guy, especially looking at, like, funny little things that he's done, which are his own, like getting provincial level trade deals with the United States, and getting, stuff like that, where he's trying in, like, not the perfect way, but he's the only person who seems to care about actual meaningful economic development. I mean, yeah, he's too much green stuff, whatever, but he's trying with a narrow sliver of power that he has. I mean, he's completely alienated and isolated within the DA. he's like got his own little cluster of people around him that's not very big. They're not deciding factor in anything at party level. I mean, he's got good ties to Westgrow, so Westgrow becomes a good source of donor management, which means he's got his own patronage network. And I'm not saying a corrupt one, but a patronage network. Like, he has contacts with donors that's very like lucrative. So he pays for his own lunch, so to speak, in the party, and he's got his own little network, and he's trying. And I don't like all of his ideas, and I think some of them are not great, but I look at him and I kind of get a begrudging respect for the guy, because he does kind of give a shit. And I think he's sort of like a civil servant. In a normal world, he'd be in the civil service. He'd be like a department head, quietly pushing papers and making sure things are implemented. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he's a good leader or anything. I'm just saying he's a civil servant. It's a rare thing. I mean, the DA are not actually. They don't have the civil servant mentality. They have this very they have a more modern Blairite civil servant approach where it's kind of like, well, actually these plebs need to be pushed around and who cares what actually happens to them, kind of a thing. We just need to get our KPIs ticked. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'll see you guys next week.